Well, I'm Mr. Tabor. I was an attack helicopter pilot in Vietnam from December 1968 until July of 1970. Very challenging 18 months. As an attack helicopter pilot, you were in danger every time you flew. And you got in the frame of mind where you lived one day at a time. And in the unit I was in, it had a specialized mission where we were exposed to enemy fire, but we also always flew with Air Force or Navy aircraft and rescue aircraft, which made it a little more palatable, knowing that if something went wrong and you were shot down, the chances were pretty good they were going to get you back out. So lived with that. And our other primary mission was to support the ground soldiers that were in combat, and we did so providing rocket and suppressive fires to them 24/7 as needed. Just like a fighter jet would scramble, we would scramble and fly the support cover for them. So I did that for 18 months. As I left Vietnam, I took the option of a promotion to first lieutenant and was reassigned to Washington, D.C. Flew in the executive flight detachment, part-time, based at Fort Belvoir, and had the chance to fly with general officers and take them on trips along the East Coast, land and take off at the Pentagon helipad near where the 9/11 crash was, and had a good time. When that assignment was up, I went back to flight school in the Army. I was trained as a fixed-wing pilot, flying multi-engine airplanes. Finished that in 71, and by then Vietnam was starting to really wind down, so they didn't want me to go back to Vietnam. And I was able to get readmitted to college, and I went to UNH, finished BA in history there, and a minor in geography. And when I finished there in 74, I was sent to Kaiserslautern, Germany, to a missile battalion. Its primary mission was to shoot down aircraft. And I stayed in Germany until 1978, commanded a missile battery over there. I then went back to school at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Learned to drive tanks and shoot tanks, and it was really cool. When I finished there, I was sent to Hampton Roads, Virginia, and I spent 4 years there doing the development work that put 3 missile systems into the Army inventory: the roll-on missile system, Patriot, and Stinger. 2 of those are still very much part of the Army's arsenal today. When I finished 4 years there, I was destined to join the 1st Patriot Missile Battalion that was going to deploy to Germany. And for whatever reason, politics, they decided I was more important someplace else, so I didn't have that opportunity. So I worked on the roll-on missile system, which was a very complex mobile system that we were building in the U.S. with technology from the Germans and the French. And it was eventually, the program was terminated due to cost, and they put all the equipment in the New Mexico National Guard. So my challenge was to train full-time National Guardsmen to use that equipment and be able to deploy anywhere in the world when needed. I finished that assignment, and I was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, and was a staff officer in what was called the Army Development and Employment Agency, and it was a neat little niche that was set aside at Fort Lewis, and we were the forerunners in developing and purchasing technology like Gore-Tex for the soldiers. We were the first to introduce some all-terrain vehicles, all kinds of really neat stuff. So in 1989, they wanted me to go back to Germany, and I opted to retire, and I moved back here, and I've been here ever since.
What was your experience like when you came back to America? How did citizens treat you and others?
Well, if you remember my class that I teach at the middle school, I described the second time I came home in July of '70, knowing that when we refueled in Japan, you ran into the exchange and you bought civilian clothes because we didn't have any civilian clothes in Vietnam. And as soon as we got back to McCord Air Force Base in Washington, we ran into the bathroom, we ditched our flight suits, put on jeans and t-shirts, and jumped out the window and grabbed a taxi to the Seattle airport. Needless to say, we kind of stood out as soldiers, and yeah, the treatment, a lot of people weren't happy with us. I got back to Boston that night. I wanted to get a rent-a-car to go to my parents' lake house up near Hanover, and no one would rent me a car because I didn't have a current credit card. I had cash, but so I called my parents, who had no idea I was even out of Vietnam yet. And after some haggling, they were able to somehow clear Avis at Logan Airport to give me a car. And I drove home. Of course, my parents both worked in the store, family business, and they didn't even get up when I came in. I just crashed on a couch. And the next day, with that big wad of cash, I went to a Porsche garage in White River Junction, Vermont, and I bought a 914 mini Porsche. But it was hot stuff. And, the next night, I pulled into the local A&W root beer joint to meet some friends, and a state trooper followed me in and proceeded to give me a citation for having an illegal inspection sticker. So I was upset even more after this. And when I got home that night, I looked at the ticket, and he had the wrong date on it. He said July instead of August. Well, that day in July, I had been in Hong Kong, and I had orders saying on 3 July I had flown to Hong Kong. So I went to court. And I come into the municipal court, and the judge was Dr. Savage, who'd been the dean at the Dartmouth Medical School and was my grandfather's fly fishing buddy. So I figured I'll skate through this like a piece of whatever. The bailiff had been my rec basketball coach. So he's standing there looking at me, and the judge says, "How do you plead?" And the state trooper is standing there. I said, "Not guilty, Your Honor." He said, "What do you mean, not guilty?" So I put the ticket up there. He said, "This says 3 July. Here are my orders. I was in Hong Kong on leave." He looked at him. He just looked me in the eye, and he said, "Pay the fucking fine. Get your butt out of here." You know, and I'm going, "You gotta be kidding me." So I paid the fine. That afternoon, I'd stopped at a little convenience market to get some beverages near my parents' lake house, and of course I was driving the Porsche, no shoes, and I get out of the car, and who do you think pulls into the parking lot of the little store? The state trooper. My friend. That was my welcome home.
What were the 3 most important life skills that you learned from fighting in the war?
That's a great question. Trust in your fellow pilot. We always flew in pairs. I had been an aircraft commander since we started our deployment, so I was always dependent on a co-pilot that I would train. So that was a very key factor. Live life to the fullest, because you were literally there one day at a time. And I lost some really good friends while I was in combat. And I think you learn the responsibilities of your job. As an attack helicopter pilot, we were supporting soldiers on the ground that were in combat, that conventional artillery couldn't help them, and they would allow us to literally come in to within 15 to 20 meters of them, putting down pretty heavy fire. And you were always at risk that something could go wrong, but thankfully, in my case, I never had a problem.
Can you describe your best experience from Vietnam?
Probably the most memorable experience was that first Christmas away from home. It's really, at first we didn't think much of it, but all of a sudden, you realize you're halfway around the world. It's Christmas. As I tell in my story, at the middle school, hearing the young soldier that had the Christmas carols on a cassette tape, plugging it in and hearing Silent Night, and everyone just came out of the buildings, the plywood shacks we lived in, and sang Christmas carols. That's one of the key things. But in follow-up of the guys that I went over with, almost all of us are still in contact with the internet and personally pick up the phone. We help each other. As you know, one of my roommates, Mr. Luzak, lives here in Hollis. It was kind of neat to have his son in class. I can remember when he was born. And that's probably the second.
Anything else you want to add?
I think it's very important for younger students like yourselves to be doing what you're doing. There are a lot of people that have stories that have never been told. Some of these people are not ready to tell it, but they need to know you're there when they're ready. I mean, until I started doing my thing at the middle school, my Vietnam time was slides in a box in a closet, and they stayed there. My kids, until I got active with the Vietnam Pilots Association, my kids didn't know anything. And my daughter got very engaged as a student in Sauhegan. She did her senior project on the Vietnam Memorial, which was a big deal. And, that impressed me greatly when she did that. But it's so important. When you were middle school students and you left memorials at the wall, those, we've come full circle, because this year Mrs. Spencer's group left a memorial with a poem by a young student, and that same afternoon the surviving son of that person, wife, stopped at the Vietnam Memorial and found the poem, and they're coming to the middle school the first week of May and do a presentation to the students, and they are just totally blown away that middle school students will take the time to write poems and make memorials and take them to the wall. So that's what we need, and you're going to need to, you'll relate to those that have been in Afghanistan and Iraq, because I'm sure they're going to have stories at some point in time that need to be told also. What more do you want?